Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Can't Stop Talking, by Susan Cain. About the book. Society has consistently underestimated introvert people, but very few people get to see the talent inside them. In this book, there are stories of some such introverts who have proved their mettle with their caliber and talent. The most significant feature of introvert people is that these people keep doing their work silently, opposite to extroverts, and they have no interest in being in the limelight. What will we learn from this book? Introverts are not antisocial. They also like to hang out with people, but in a slightly different way from extroverts. Western culture favors extroversion. In a culture that expects you to be highly energetic and social to be successful, being introverts can be challenging. For example, now maximum people are introverted in Japan, but hardworking and innovative people like them will not be found anywhere else. Who should read this book? As the name suggests, this book should be read by every introvert and also by those people who have any introvert in their friends or family, so that you can understand them in a better way by reading this book. Uncover the hidden talent inside them. Introduction. In this bestseller book, Susan Cain elaborates on how introverts see the world. She has described the most important trait of introverts through this book. In this world, where more than one ideal, highly assertive personality is filled with extroverts, sometimes the advantage of introverts is either forgotten or neglected. And that's where Susan's most important goal comes in, to make you count the benefits of being introverts. It is generally not considered good to be introverts in our society. For example, introvert children often get punished during their school days because they are not like everyone else, do not communicate with anyone as much as they should be like other kids. The Western ideal of a successful personality is to be highly energetic, confident, and communicative, which is in stark contrast to the introvert's lack of outward action, quietness, and shyness. And these characteristics of their personality are considered negative. However, as Susan Cain points out, this is simply a stereotype that unfortunately prevents many introverts from reaching the level of success they really should have. Here we will first explain what is extroversion and introversion, and later explain some of the most important ideas that Susan has developed in her summative book. Introversion and extroversion. These two terms are very important in psychology. By the way, the concept of introvert and extrovert type in psychology as a science subject was introduced long ago. And over the years, this subject started getting more attention through many reliable models and theories. Carl Gustav Jung, who was a very well-known psychoanalyst, has contributed a lot to psychoanalysis as well as psychology, and he did a lot of work in the development of introversion and extroversion, these two types which matter to each human being. But even today we do not have any conclusive definition of these terms, although the authors agree on its most aspect. To explain the difference between introvert and extrovert, here we will give examples of two such people who are quite popular. John Lennon, who is an important figure in the field of popular music, was a staunch exorbitant. He was always loud, giving instant response to anything. He also loved the publicity that the Beatles used to get in those days, and it was his habit to always be surrounded by people. Even after leaving the group of Beatles, he continued to draw the attention of the media. For example, he had his famous bed-ins for peace with Yoko Ono for Now, where he invited journalists to his hotel room while he lay on his bed for days. For several weeks, he only roamed inside the hotel and kept talking to journalists and getting his films made. Now this situation will be no less than a nightmare for an introvert. Yes, it is true that it is necessary for the popular people to accept that when they come out on the streets, people will follow them, stop them. Obsessed fences can surprise them. But not everyone mixes so much with popular people by calling themselves journalists to their hotel suites. Now Daniel Radcliffe is a perfect example of an introvert personality who, despite being quite popular, used to try to avoid journalists and publicity at all costs. He was not fond of being in every single blockbuster movie, and neither was he a party animal. Even to avoid people, he used to walk in the streets with many of his dogs. By many dogs, we mean really many dogs. Just imagine Daniel Radcliffe walking on the road with 10 dogs. This was his very funny way of keeping his fans away. Now back to John. John's loud personality has been shown a bit more exaggerated in the movies the Beatles made in the mid-60s. In all these films, he was shown a character who is always in the mood for fun, keeps on hitting jokes, which means that his whole life is a party. He was the polar opposite of his bandmate, George Harrison, who dislikes exposure and sits quietly in the back. In Beatles stage performances, George used to stand somewhere on the back side, while John and Paul McCartney were always at the front. George Harrison, completely different from John, used to immerse himself in work all the time. His music was also different. In the days of the Beatles era, Harrison's songs, ideas, and content differed significantly from McCartney's and Lennon's compositions, meaning that his songs were different, in which some philosophy and mystery were hidden. And when his band was closed, Harrison began to express himself and finally recorded his masterpiece, a double album All Things Must Pass. The specialty was, Harrison, a perfectionist, was so focused on his music that he forgot everything around him. He used to stay away from his social circle and everything else for months. This habit of his tormented his bandmates because their composition often could not be finished due to perfectionism. Now, look at how these two musicians used to communicate with each other. In almost every interview, John used to dominate the pitch because he was the loudest, and by interrupting, others just kept his point above or started telling some funny anecdote. On the other hand, George lived silently. He loved listening more than speaking, and even when he used to speak, he used to remain silent, speaking in a very soft voice. John was one of those people who talk with eyes and make you also a part of his world, but George rarely talks looking at anyone. And even while talking, he kept looking down to see what to say. Now talking about personal life, John's personal life was quite problematic. He had seen many ups and downs in life. John was very social. He used to meet many new people every day, including many beautiful and young ladies. Now it is a simple matter that many escapades and sequels happened with him, which had jumped a lot in the media. Later he also settled down, but John remained such a person who had more than one partner in his life. He had casual friendship with many women. On the other hand, George's personal life was quite calm and predictable. He had no scandal with other women. The friendship of introvert people is very short, and whatever happens, it is not a superficial friendship but a deep relationship which they always maintain. It is essential to understand that it is a misconception that introverts are not social and hate people, but this is absolutely wrong. Like George, his personal life is more stable. They make few friends, but whoever they make friends with, they play full. Now maybe you would have got some idea about introvert people. However, we cannot stress enough that being an introvert does not mean that you do not want to talk to people or you do not bond with them. We just gave the example of George Harrison. Although he did not like crowds, he used to roam around with his special friends and was not social at all. But this happens to all introverts, and it's for sure. They like to talk, of course, but not about everything. Extroverts love usable small talk. They can talk loosely about their last night out or even share a funny thing that happened to them while on vacation. On the other hand, introverts do not like to talk about these subjects. He likes to make deep and meaningful conversations on life, philosophy, or abstract subjects. He enjoys such deep subjects as everyday's chit-chat to extroverts. This is not a problematic thing, but it has been seen that often when extroverts tease such a thing, introverts do not engage in it. We will give one more example of this. Introverts are also social, but in a different way. Both Stephen and Mark studied at the same university. After the class, both of them used to enjoy going to a nearby pub with the rest of the students. In such a situation, you often get to see many differences between extroverts and introverts. Now Stephen was an ordinary extrovert boy, the loud and flamboyant type. He used to sit in the pub in such a way that everyone would see him, and even if no one was seeing him, he used to divert his attention towards himself. It was Mark who was an introvert. Although he liked to talk about his favorite topics with his classmates, he sometimes used to sit quietly with everyone, especially when, after 2 or 4 beers, everyone started talking loose and pointless. Every day his friends kept on anchoring him to talk more openly, but he did not like everything. Once, Stephen was telling everyone about his last trip to Prague, how many parties he had there, how many love affairs he had, how many people he met, and so on. His story was very long, and people were listening with the heart. Even when people were speaking in the middle, they were also telling stories similar to Stephen's. When Mark mentioned that day's class lecture to change the topic, everyone stared at him strangely, especially Stephen. He kept his story continuous by cutting Mark's talk in the middle. When Mark felt that his efforts were in vain, he also became silent and kept getting bored listening to his nonsense. After that he went and sat quietly in a corner where no one could see him. He also felt that if he ever had to speak in a crowd, then it would be so weird and uncomfortable for him. It would have been better if he had fewer friends with whom he could have a meaningful and deep conversation. Western culture, extroversion as an ideal for success. As we have mentioned earlier, being extroversion is considered a quality that leads to success because, in Western culture, a lot of value is given to sociability, confidence, and assertion. However, it is not proven that just having all these make a person successful. This is a very important idea that Susan Cain has developed in her book. Competence is not the same as confidence. In many Western countries, if you have more confidence, then you may become more successful even if you have less competition than you have more competition and less confidence. And because of this thought, many introverts are not able to grow up. But by doing a slight examination of other cultures, we can break this unjustified Western stereotype. Let's take the example of Japan. In the aspect of Western culture, Japan can be considered a completely polar opposite, especially in terms of social relationships and success. In a way, Japan is a haven for introverts. Usually, the people here are more quiet. Talking loudly in the streets is considered rude. Everyone does their own thing. This is the same situation in school and college also, where on the one hand, many American universities anchor extroversion-related traits in which there are compulsory activities like group work, presentation, etc. On the other hand, there is a different situation in Japan. There, more students do their work on their own and remain calm even during lectures. No one asks unnecessary questions until the professor asks something. Apart from this, we can see some other differences. Social psychologists have emphasized the notion of personal space, whose simple meaning is to keep space around a person's body in which no one else should enter. Only special friends and partners can enter a person's personal space. The personal space area of Japanese people is vast, and they usually do not touch others just like that, not even while greeting. They just bow down in front of each other. Hugging people is avoided because, for them, it is breaching their personal space. Simply, Japanese people are mean to themselves and generally not as social as Americans whose personal space is a little more narrow. Handshaking is a normal thing in American society, and people usually hug everyone, whether it is close friends or casuals. In America, this thing is not only okay, but people like it too. Finally, we took an example from Japan to show how an entire country with more introverts than America is still so successful. Needless to say that Japan is one of the most hardworking and productive countries in the world. After World War II, it had made the whole country new in a few years. Then it never looked back and kept on moving ahead in the world with its technology. This proves that not only are introverts successful and productive, but they can outdo extroverts also in many respects because it is only the cultural atmosphere that becomes an obstacle in their path. The origin of differences. The most important difference is probably in the overall sensitivity of our brain. In short, introverts have a more sensitive brain. This means that these people quickly notice any change in the environment. And these people do not even get bored alone because their brain is very active, which keeps giving them new ideas. Introverts are more introspective who think deeply about their feelings and the inner world. On the other hand, extroverts get bored of being alone very quickly. Their brain needs some kind of stimulation, and they like an environment with a lot of action and stimulation. So if you are an extrovert, then you can become a Wall Street broker with great pleasure. Here we will take an example of the movie called The Wolf of Wall Street, in which we can see the prototype of the Western stereotype about extroverts, that extroverts are more successful people. It is shown in this movie that a group of some people is working in a room. They are all shouting and talking to each other, as well as they are also checking some numbers on the screen, calling their customers. They also convinced to take the shares of their company. Brokers are shown to be very reward-seeking and goal-oriented in this movie. They just want money, at any cost. Other than that, they don't mind anything else. The same introverts will probably face difficulty working in a place where there is so much noise, so many people, and the unbearable amount of information that constantly hits their mind will confuse them completely. Because they have more sensitivity, introverts like to focus on only one thing at a time. And of course, they'll do that more thoroughly than extroverts. That's why these people are also more productive when they get a quiet environment with less information. We explain this characteristic with an example from another movie, Barton Fink. This movie is one of the few early movies of the Coen brothers. This movie is about a man who comes to Los Angeles to write a movie script. His productive process is in stark contrast to the character featured in Wolf of Wall Street. Barton Fink, the hero of the movie, mainly sits in his hotel room and focuses on only one thing, and that is his movie script. He keeps thinking a lot about the plot of his movie, about its various characters, how they will interact with each other. He hardly leaves the room, and whenever he goes, it is not for long. The only person he talks to in that entire hotel is his closest neighbor, played brilliantly by John Goodman. It can be noted that the extroverts are good at highly stressful situations and multitasking. They also require high pressure and stressful situations, which satiates their hunger for action and excitement. The same introverts are not very good at multitasking, but they thoroughly do one thing at a time. Introversion extroversion as a dimension. One thing about all this is that no one is exclusively introvert or extrovert. It is not a category or type as earlier researchers used to think, but yes, it does form a two-pole scale. So you can be more or less introvert or extrovert sometimes. And the biggest thing is that most people in the world are somewhere in the middle of these two types. Sometimes they are more calm, self-absorbers, and sometimes more social and attention seekers in any other situation. So it is essential to reconcile that we all have both these extremes, and more importantly, we should learn how to use these two qualities at the right time. Susan Cain calls it stretching yourself. Susan explains that stretch yourself requires you to recognize your automatic, initial responses and try to act differently. For example, a person who is high in introversion will get stuck in a socially awkward situation. However, because they have an extrovert quality, it is good for them to keep them a little relaxed. On the other hand, a person who is high in extroversion but lacks introvert quality, because of this, sometimes it will be useful for him to sit alone in his room and think about life calmly. We will give 2 real-life examples of what people do to stretch them. Now, as we take, Mike is a very energetic, active, and social person. He always tells jokes to the people, keeps on laughing. Because his friends also expect the same from him, he is always in the mood for fun. Although at one point he was in a slightly sad mood, in a way, he was down because he had a fight with his girlfriend. And now, instead of hanging out, he is sitting with his best friend and talking about life. Mike realized how his father shaped his personality and how he could hurt people with his behavior. He kept on talking to his friend about life in general, what is the purpose of life, what its meaning is. In short, instead of acting in impulse, Mike was sitting comfortably and thinking about his inner world, which gave him many ideas and new thoughts. Now let's take Joanne, a usable introvert. There is no need to describe her characteristics here. Although she's usually quite shy and a little self-confident, sometimes she wants to do something completely different, something like a jump out of her skin type. One day she dared to accept a party invitation. It's strictly not a party. Yes, it was the kind of event where people used to come for some fun and to relax a little. However, Joanne used to avoid these types of events. This time, she wanted to go to the party and meet new people. She went to this party with her best friend, Sonia. As soon as they reached the party, Sonia introduced Joanne to some of her friends, and she went ahead in the crowd. Usually, in such a situation, Joanne feels a bit queasy, and she immediately started looking for her friend, but this time it did not happen. She dared to start the conversation. She was a little nervous, but she didn't try to hide her nervousness. So that's why she said, "It's great weather today, isn't it?" And the girl to whom she said this laughed. This means she understood Joanne's condition, and Joanne too was not shy but a little relaxed, and then her chit-chat started with her new friend. Conclusion: now we are giving you a short list of some of the most important tips taken from this book. Introverts are not antisocial. They also like to hang out with people but in a slightly different way from extroverts. Western culture favors extroversion. In a culture that expects you to be highly energetic and social to be successful, being introverts can be challenging. However, we have also seen examples of cultures such as Japan, where introverts are equal to extroverts and more successful than them. Biological origin of differences. These personality traits are such that they have a firm basis in the brain. Although permanently changing them is not easy, but it is temporarily possible. We are neither completely introvert nor extrovert. It depends on the situation how you will behave when. Yes, it is true that if your personality is of stable type, it does not mean that you will never do something unexpected. And to do that, you'll need to learn.